All right, thanks everybody for coming tonight. My name is Philip O'Donnell. I'm a data scientist by day, and really what that means for anybody who's not in my industry is that I'm a numbers guy. By night, I'm a startup junkie. So I've built anything from payment processors to email marketing to high-frequency trading. And the reason that I want to come and speak with you tonight is I want to share an area of entrepreneurialism and opportunities related to this new technology called cryptocurrencies, blockchain, Bitcoin, a lot of these words that you've used here tonight. I want you to walk away with this with three things. One is I want to give you an idea of what cryptocurrencies are, why people are so excited about them, and give you just a really solid understanding of what we're actually talking about when we're dealing with cryptocurrencies. Then secondly, I'm going to give some real tactical tips on where you buy them, how you get them, where you put them, what that actual process looks like to acquire them, because it's very different from the acquisition that you would think of another type of security or as a stock or things like that. And then the last area I want to do is I want to start looking forward. I want to take you into where this technology or the technology behind the technology can really take us and where there are some tremendous opportunities to leverage using that underlying technology to make some real advancement. So before I get into that though, it's important to put the disclaimer up. This is not investment advice. These things are very risky. Cryptocurrencies are still the Wild West. So if you think back to the Wild West, right? What needed to happen in the Wild West? You had to protect yourself. You needed your own guns. You needed to be able to do your own thing. There's nobody that's going to help you in the cryptocurrency world. If you lose your crypto, it's gone. So you should be very careful. Exchange hacks are frighteningly common. You need to take ownership of your own security if you're going to play in this world. But a lot of people are willing to do that because they see the opportunity here. So let's look at a few people who've talked about Bitcoins and blockchains and cryptocurrencies in the past. This is Peter Thiel, who is in the startup world, PayPal. You know, he uses the phrase, change the world. Well, that's, you know, kind of high and mighty coming from somebody who developed what arguably was the last great advance in payment technologies, was the move from credit cards to this sort of electronic payments directly between people. So he's somebody who knows what he's talking about. Then you look at somebody like Richard Branson, who uses the phrase transform payments, right? So these are people who live in the technology space and they're seeing the opportunity that this represents, and they're making comments on it. And contrast that with people from the more traditional older spaces, like a Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett embodies what I would call the approach to cryptocurrencies. It's there, a lot of people are talking about it, but you know, I'm not really going to get involved because I don't know what's going to happen to it. Worth pointing out, Warren Buffett missed the entire rise of the internet, so while he may be a great investment advisor, he's probably not the best person to tell us what technologies are going to become important in the next future. And then you look at somebody from the traditional banking industry, somebody like Jamie Dimon, who just comes out and says, no, this is all fraud, scams, drug dealers, criminals, whatever. Now, I'm going to tell you, this happens. This is out there. There are lots of scams. There are lots of fraud. Remember the Wild West? Lots of that stuff going on. It doesn't mean that there's no value there. It doesn't mean there's no use for it. It just means you got to be careful, right? Look at somebody like Jamie Dimon representing JP Chase. They're coming from the traditional financial services industry. And they're sort of commenting on this new space that's evolved, where they're not already here. It represents something of a difference from where they might exist. And you know, you might think, well, why should we listen to them? Who should we listen to in terms of it? And so it's worth pointing out, you know, it's not like the banks have been bastions of security and fraud. I mean, I don't think anybody here would consider their Wall Street bank to be protecting them from anything. I mean, it's not like you can just go out and Google money laundering and find, oh wait, it's actually incredibly easy. We are really bad at this stuff. 660,000 hits just from Googling that. It's the Swiss. Do you know how obvious you have to be with money laundering for the Swiss to find you? It's literally the whole reason they exist as a country. This is the kind of place that you're coming from here because, and this is important to realize, this really does represent a threat to that business model, right? When the first banks, first credit card networks came along, you saw this projection from a very centralized system of everyone talking to a bank and the bank keeping track of your money, and that was it. That was the whole spectrum. Then you saw a shift to, well, we need to scale this. So you saw something like credit card networks where it was, well, you talk to the credit card network and then you let the credit card network sort of forward that along and manage those payments. When you get into cryptocurrencies and the blockchain, and we're going to talk about this more specifically, but they're not involved there. It's a peer-to-peer thing. It's just a distributed keeping track of it ourselves. And so if there's no obvious place here, then you could expect people who ran banks and credit card networks to be a little nervous, right? They might do something like tell you can't buy them with credit cards or banks, which they just did. And this was 3 weeks ago, by the way. So when I say this industry is moving quickly, it's moving very quickly. It's up to an exercise to the reader, to the listener, to determine whether or not this is protection of us or protection of them. But I want to at least acknowledge that this sort of conversation is out there and who some of the people are that are having it. But the thing is, I don't think it's going to work. No matter how much Jamie Dimon thinks it's all drug dealers and things, what you're really seeing here is just a continuation of the evolution of computing itself. When computing started, it was mainframes, right? That was the first computers. They were big, they were in big buildings. You went to the place to use the mainframe. Very centralized, right? It was all there. And then you saw an evolution from that to this idea of terminals and thin clients, and the idea that, like, yes, the mainframe was somewhere and it still did all the things, but you had something that you used that just sort of talked to it. And that evolved into the PCs. Those terminals became the PCs. And the original PCs were very disconnected, right? You had disks you passed around, maybe bulletin boards in the very early days, but it was very decentralized, right? The PCs were all running on their own. With the advent of the internet, that started to shift back again. You started to see processing, coordination move off of the PCs and onto the internet, onto these servers. And the idea there was what PCs lacked was the ability to coordinate, the lack of a central authority to, say, tell you what the price of an airline ticket was or keep your files safe, right? So they were filling a need. Mobile came along and took that even further, because now all you need is the phone. You don't even need the PC, right? And so you continue to see this process until you get to the cloud. And that's sort of where we are now, right? You look at a Chromebook, nothing more than a PC with a web browser and nothing else on it, ostensibly. You can still do other things on it, but the idea is that now we're back to the cloud. Now we're back to centralization, right? There was a need that took us back there. With blockchains, with cryptocurrencies, we're seeing that start to peel away again, because what blockchains and cryptocurrencies give us the ability to do is to coordinate amongst ourselves without needing that central authority. Coordination and synchronization was what drove the adoption of centralized technologies. Blockchain is peeling away from that. So if you make your money in any of these other places, you're going to be a little scared when blockchains come along. So what cryptocurrencies really are then, if we don't think of them as the banks want us to think of them as a bunch of drug dealers, if we think of them in what they are, they're the confluence of three sort of major ideas and concepts that sort of come together and create this critical mass that's really got what people are excited about. First is the idea of virtual assets. You go back 10 years, this was like controversial. The idea that you could spend dollars to buy something that only existed virtually, and that virtual thing somehow had value. In the mid-2000s, people would say, you're insane for buying cosmetics for your little cat or your crypto kitty or whatever they were calling it. I wasn't in the crypto world at the time, but this had parallels back then. People enjoyed that, but now it's a common thing, right? With the idea that you can buy something virtual and it has value is commonly accepted. So now that that's commonly accepted, then the question was, well, now that's being done by centralized authorities, and the blockchain came along and said, maybe you don't need those centralized authorities. Maybe we can go down, and we're going to show you exactly what that means here in a couple minutes. And the last one, honestly, when it comes to what need is being fulfilled by blockchains and by cryptocurrencies, it is the complete lack of innovation in the payment space in the last 15 or 20 years. Think about it. Since PayPal, right, since Thiel, what has changed in the payment space to replace credit cards, to replace PayPal, to replace banks? Nothing. It stopped. Innovation stopped. Apple Payment is still going through the same credit card networks when they transact. You're still in the same world. It's still the idea that you need someone who you can give your money to keep it safe, and they'll manage what you do with it. They'll be in control of it. That, sorry? Well, we're going to find out. So when I say that I think cryptocurrencies are in the future here, I'm not just saying that because I see it happening. I say that because it is the confluence of three very real needs in the marketplace that are just coming together at this time. Bitcoin was started in 2009, right? How many of you heard of Bitcoin until just like the next year? What do you think it was doing since 2009? It's been running. It's been providing value. But the virtual assets weren't there yet. The blockchain wasn't quite there yet. The payment infrastructure, people weren't quite frustrated enough yet with it. There was Apple coming along telling they're going to change it and then just reproducing the same thing. So that's how we get to where we are with slide technology. This is Candy Crush. Anybody play Candy Crush? Candy Crush is a cryptocurrency. They're called gold bars. The exchange rate's about 1 to 10, it looks like, on this one. So you get a discount if you buy more. Notice you can buy it with credit cards. You remember how JP Chase said you can't buy Bitcoins with credit cards? No problem buying Candy Crush bars with credit cards. The only thing, the difference between this and what we're talking about is that you can't really sell them, right? You can buy them, but you can't sell them. So it doesn't really meet the actual need of what we're talking about. So you go ahead. World of Warcraft. We play World of Warcraft back in the day. World of Warcraft started in 2004. By 2005, there were millions of dollars being traded for Warcraft's cryptocurrency. They just called it gold. If you're sensing a theme, people like using the phrase gold to describe these things. That chart is from 2005. People were already tracing. And I just found that in a Google search of like, somebody had this chart back then. It was talking about the change in the value there. It had an exchange rate. But that wasn't really like accepted. Blizzard didn't like that, or Activision, Blizzard, whatever it was at the time. They didn't like that. So you could get your account banned if you did this. But it was possible, right? So the best example from the past, if we're thinking about what blockchain does, was called Second Life. If anybody has ever played Second Life, Second Life had a cryptocurrency called Linden dollars. And very much like Bitcoin, you could buy and sell Linden dollars from Linden Labs, the maker of the technology. They would do it at about 240 to 250, depending on what their economist said. But they encouraged people to buy Linden dollars, start businesses within the software, gather those resources together through providing value within the technology, and then making that back into dollars at the end of it. So this is very close to what Bitcoin and blockchain-based cryptocurrencies ended up being, except it's still a centralized authority, right? It's still a single person that's taking care of your money. So the best way to think about a blockchain for a group like this, I think, is just to pretend that we're going to make one. So we're going to launch JaxCoin. Now, I didn't build this app, but there's nothing preventing us from doing this, and so let's just walk through the exercise. If you're all going to pull out your phones, everybody's going to download an app. It's called JaxCoin. The purpose of JaxCoin is going to be anybody in here that wants to give somebody else money, we're going to make it really easy. If you want to go to local businesses and spend it without using credit cards, you don't have to pay the 3% fee, you don't have to pay the 3% charge on it. It's going to be just something to make it really easy for us here to transact value through these cryptocurrencies. And anybody with a smartphone app can use it, right? Anybody that downloads the app instantly has access. There's no approval, there's no application, there's no nothing like that. So this chart shows those little dots there all talking to each other. Those are our apps talking to each other on that. That's every one of those is one of you with your phone that downloaded this. Those apps are doing 4 things. The first thing they're doing is they're keeping track of how much you have, right? It's literally a ledger of this is your account balance, here's how much is in your account. The second thing that they're doing is when you want to make a transaction, when I decide to pay Ben over here, I'm going to send it and broadcast that transaction to everybody else in here. So I'm going to say very loud, I am giving Ben 1 JaxCoin. And everybody's apps in here all learn about that, and they all see it. And they all update their internal record. And when they do that, they're validating it. They're saying, I know what all of you have, and you all know what I have. So if I say I'm going to give Ben $1, every one of you has the opportunity to say, you don't have any JaxCoin, you can't give him that JaxCoin. So that all of those apps are all validating every transaction that every other person is making in the network since the beginning of time from that network. This is not a point in time where you download it and then you keep going. I'm literally saying from the very first transaction, every single one of you will know every single transaction from the beginning of time, and it's immutable. Can't be changed. Mathematically, it can't be changed. We'll have a lot of time for questions at the end. So with that in mind, consider this, right? All the cryptocurrency is those apps talking to each other, keeping track of that money from each other. Give me to the next one. There you go. The blockchain, then, you hear the word blockchain thrown around. The blockchain is just that list of transactions, right? It's how you get from the very beginning to where we are now. You put those transactions into blocks, you put those blocks in a chain, and you call it a blockchain. That's where the concept came from. So the important thing just to know there is that this is not just a concept, this is real mathematical stuff. I'm just really glossing it over here to make it really super simple, right? The cryptocurrency then, if you want to know what is JaxCoin, JaxCoin is just the balances in those ledgers, right? It's just whatever the apps say you have, that's what you have. What we just described here is Bitcoin. There are some nuances between them, but the basic idea is the same. Everybody that has a Bitcoin node has every Bitcoin transaction that's ever happened, and when everyone tries to send a Bitcoin to someone else, every single node checks. That process of every single node checking is where we get the decentralization concept from. Notice I didn't say Kelly's in charge of this, and he's going to make sure all these transactions are valid. All of us are making sure all those transactions are valid. And if there's ever a disconnect between them, we'll have lots of time for questions, I promise. If there's ever a disconnect between what you think the value is and what someone over here thinks the value is, the answer of how much money is in an account is whatever the majority of people think. It's called a consensus algorithm. The idea is that whatever 50% of people think the real truth is the truth. And that will replay itself over and over again as we talk about different currencies and different things. So keep that in mind. The centralized authority here is not a designated individual. It is the collective idea of the majority of the people who are involved in the network. So, just a little quick economics, and I promise I won't spend a ton of time on economics, but there's a lot of people that hear this and be like, yeah, but why would I want just this coin? Like, what gives it worth? Why is it worth anything? Two things that define value in a classical economic sense: scarcity and utility. Scarcity is the idea that you can't just constantly make copies of something and reproduce it, right? Physical goods is easy to understand scarcity because it's a physical good. In the virtual space, scarcity is much more difficult because it is easy to copy bits. Is it easy to change the ledger to make us look like that? So if you want to think about the utility or the scarcity in this space, it's really the confluence of what the technology is telling us from the distribution, right? Going back to that same idea of the distribution. We are all keeping each other honest. If I try to send it and it's not right, everybody in here is going to tell me I'm an idiot and I shouldn't do that, right? That keeps the Bitcoin scarce because I can't just create it. All of you will stop me. That is scarcity. The other parts of scarcity are about hacking, about security, right? Bitcoin is, I use the word unfeasible there, because in technology you can never say something is impossible, you just say it's unfeasible. Unfeasible in this sense means that literally if I have a Bitcoin address and one of you is going to hack my address by just sort of guessing it, you could get to the heat death of the universe with our current technology and you would still have a statistically zero chance of having guessed it. It is virtually impossible with our current level of technology to hack the blockchain. If you hack the blockchain, if one of you here becomes incredibly inspired by this and goes out and decides they're going to figure out how to hack the blockchain, there's $180 billion waiting for you. You will instantly become one of the richest people who have ever existed. The fact that nobody's done it yet should be a pretty clear indication that it's unfeasible to hack the blockchain. It is safe, it is scarce, it is secure. Those network effects that you see from any cryptocurrency like this, network effects, if you know, technical people, is the idea that a network with 10 people is worth more than twice a network with 5. So each individual user you add, the value of the network increases faster than that. But it also works in reverse, which means if we wanted to, the word that we use is fork the currency, and over here you're going to have JaxCoin, and over here you're going to have JaxCoin Cash, then we will have two different networks, and there will be twice as much JaxCoin in the world. Right? But the value of that JaxCoin will be worth less than half of what it did before. And so nobody in here who has JaxCoin would ever want that to happen. And so there's no economic incentive for forking if we all agree that this is the way that it should be. And so the network itself creates the scarcity that's required for the economics to give it value. And the second part is on utility. Right? It needs to be useful. It needs to do something. Utility has two parts, and I have to pull this out because a lot of people will say, why is Bitcoin worth $20,000? Now I don't, well, it's 11,000 now, or 10,000. I don't know, what is it today? It's hard to keep track. Whatever it's worth today, there's a lot of people who think that's crazy, and there's a lot of people who think that's undervalued. So what should the price be? Well, I don't know what the price should be, but I do know what's in the price. And the price is in two things. One, it's in its current utility, right? It's what you can do with Bitcoin now, or anything of value, right? It's what you can do with it now. That's relatively small because of a lot of technical hurdles that are happening. But the second part is speculative utility. And I'm not using the word speculative in a negative sense. I just literally mean unknown, and people are sort of guessing as to what that value is. And people have vastly different ideas of what that value is, so you see vastly different prices. Fortunately, the market has a very good mechanism for figuring out amongst itself what the true value is, and that's called the price, and that's what we see. So when you see the price is inflated and you think Bitcoin's in a bubble, that's wrong. All you're viewing is a disjointed set of people with differing opinions on what something's worth. It's only in retrospect that you can look back and see it's in a bubble. But there is no way objectively in the moment to make that decision. So now that we talked about what cryptocurrencies are, why they have value, why you might want some, I want to talk about how you get them. And I'm going to walk through a couple of actual cryptocurrencies so you can sort of understand the range of options that are out there. And then we'll give them some more tactical stuff. So the big daddy, the granddaddy of it all is Bitcoin. It was sort of the first, it wasn't the first cryptocurrency, but it was the first one that really caught mainstream attention. When I ran this chart, and it's probably saved since then, Bitcoin collectively was worth $178 billion. That's the market capitalization. Market capitalization in this sense is just the current price times the total number that are out there. Now, any of you who are finance people will be the first to raise your hand and say it's not like you can sell that and get $178 billion. And you're right, but that's not true about anything. Right? It doesn't matter how much Google is worth. If I own all the Google shares and I sell all the Google shares, I'm not going to have Google's market capitalization, right? Market capitalization is just an observation about adding two numbers together, nothing more than that. The next one that we're going to talk about is called Ethereum. There you go, Ethereum. Now, Ethereum is based on Bitcoin. It's a separate cryptocurrency, but it has the same underpinnings, the same blockchain-based thing. The only difference between Ethereum and Bitcoin, purposes of our conversation, is Ethereum gives you the ability to run code on the blockchain. So whereas in Bitcoin, all you can really do is send account ledger balances from one person to another. With Ethereum, you can actually instruct those apps, all your little apps that we downloaded for our JaxCoin, to run code, arbitrary code, that other people in the network have given them. So it turns, in a very real sense, turns that network, that JaxCoin network we just did, into a computer that is immutable, that its actions are permanent. And that has a lot of value in a lot of different applications. If anybody's heard about sort of ICOs and crypto tokens and things, all those are built on Ethereum because if you think about it, if you can run arbitrary code on the blockchain, that means you can build a blockchain on the blockchain, right? Because the blockchain is just code, and so you can sort of meta your way all the way down if you want to. But one level is enough because it makes it a little easier. And so all of those tokens you keep hearing about of people issuing ICOs and things like that, they're just executing code on the Ethereum blockchain. That's it. That's as complicated as it gets. Then we look at something called the basic attention token. Advertising is kind of the classic example for Web 2.0. The idea here is that this is a token, like we just talked about, but it's a very specific token. It's designed to allow people to sell advertising and get this token, and it allows people to buy this token in order to buy advertising. So it's sort of a use case specific cryptocurrency. This particular one is based on Ethereum. There are lots of other ones that are based on their own sort of networks, just like JaxCoin does. Something like Tether. How many of you have heard of Tether? Tether has a lot of angry people in the world right now. Tether is just like Bitcoin. There is no difference. In fact, I think they just used the code from Bitcoin. The only difference between Tether and Bitcoin is that another company out there has just said, whatever happens, no matter what happens in the world, I'm going to buy your Tether from you for $1, and I'm going to sell Tether to you for $1. If somebody's willing to do that, they're creating what's called a peg. In this case, it's a dollar peg, which means one Tether is always worth $1, as long as you trust the company underneath it, which is where people are upset. This is worth $2 billion, by the way, just because I said you can trade it for $1. That's $2 billion. Now, the company doesn't have $2 billion, And that causes a lot of people to get upset with them. But in the classic economic sense, fractional banking has been a thing since the beginning of time in money. So it's not by itself mean that it's a scam or it's bad. It just means that you really have to trust that a company like this has the reserves to back it. And as much as you want to speculate on that, it has still maintained its value as the classic pegged cryptocurrency if you want to hold crypto, but you don't want the value to change against the dollar. This is Bitcoin Cash. Bitcoin Cash is what happens when grumpy programmers get upset with each other about exactly what the technology she would do. Remember before when we said, you know, you guys over here are going to be JaxCoin and you guys are going to here be JaxCoin Cash. That's all Bitcoin Cash is. There's a part of the network just decided we're going to go our own way, do our own thing, and we're going to get to the end. If you want an exchange, if you want to buy cryptocurrencies, you're going to need an exchange. And this is a list, probably a very fuzzy list, of sort of the top exchanges that are out there. The big one is Coinbase. If you're just new to cryptocurrencies, this is probably where you should start. They, until 3 weeks ago, accepted credit cards, but they still accept bank deposits and things. It's very safe. They're licensed in the United States. Everything about them is on the up and up. So if you're looking for a way to get in, it's like the safest possible option. You're looking at Coinbase. The third one there is called local Bitcoins. Now, every version of cryptocurrency has one of these. It's basically just where you go and you find someone, like somebody sitting here, and buy the Bitcoin. You give them cash and buy the Bitcoin. That sounds pretty sketchy, but it's actually very common in the industry to operate like that because it avoids the traditional financial system altogether. Right? It's just exchanging cash for these cryptocurrencies. You can also use any of these other people. The Polynex and things like that, all of these exchanges have different cryptocurrencies available, and so sometimes you're sort of stuck if you want to trade something particular. You have to pick one of these. But all these other exchanges operate on the same premises. They're just different places to transact these cryptocurrencies. You just have to find the one that you want and trade it. This is GDAX. This is attached to Coinbase. It's their live trading platform. I wanted to put this up there because I mentioned before that I'd done some high frequency trading. This screen, if anybody's been in finance, is called a level 2 order screen. It's giving you like literally moment by moment updates as to the orders that are sitting on the exchange. This is actually a higher level than what's available through the GDAX API. You can actually get level 3 orders, which is as they're added and closed, they actually give you the orders. If anybody's ever tried to do this in the stock market, getting this level of access to a market would cost you millions of dollars in volume to justify having this type of access, to be able to hook up to this. But I can do it right now for free. When I started this, right, I wrote some code in 2 weeks that could do a round trip of an order on GDAX in less than 150 milliseconds. Now that doesn't sound like a lot if you're in high frequency trading, but these things don't have high frequency stuff set up on it. 150 milliseconds, or 50 milliseconds as we were able to get it to, puts you on par with JP Morgan Chase, with the biggest people in the world. All you can do to go faster is co-locate a server, and you can co-locate a server, any one of you can co-locate a server right next to GDAX just by doing it in the right region in AWS. This is incredibly democratizing. If any of you is interested in high frequency trading or algorithmic driven, all that trend stuff that was so popular still works with cryptocurrencies here. So if you have an opportunity, if you're interested, this is a great place to start. All the exchanges operate in basically the same way. But again, you're taking something where if you're doing it in the traditional system, in the traditional financial system, you're paying a lot of money and you're doing it here for a drastically reduced volume. If you're going to hold the cryptocurrency, you know, I tell you how to get it, and now you have to keep it. You can leave it on the exchange. And if you're with Coinbase or someone really safe like that, you're probably okay. But if you're not, you're going to want to get it off. Exchanges get hacked. Your money is not safe there. It's only as safe as the exchange itself. And there's 2 ways you can really do that. Just like we said that you can download an app for JaxCoin, you can download an app for any cryptocurrency. And that will allow you to transfer the money to be managed by yourself. Again, the money is not on the app. The money is just on the network, right? But the app allows you to interact with the network. And so that's, they call that a wallet. It gives you the ability to do that. There are also things that sort of operate as multi-wallet services, and this gives you the ability to manage accounts across different cryptocurrencies, but without installing every single app. It's a little bit less safe than doing it all yourself, because you're not doing it all yourself, but generally you don't store your credentials with these services, you keep those. And so it's really about you sort of giving them the ability to transact that. So, I think it's my favorite part. which as an entrepreneur, as people are interested in this, I start thinking about how you use this technology to build new businesses and how you need to do things with it. And the first thing people are doing with cryptocurrencies is fundraising. Right? That's what most of you have probably heard of, ICOs, token offerings, things like that. In 2017, there were $3.8 billion raised for companies with cryptocurrencies. Now that's just a number, but it's worth pointing out that it's more than the entire venture capital industry in Silicon Valley used to invest in Silicon Valley companies in 2017. And despite all of the fear-mongering and anger and scams and whatever, we are already on track, even in January, to have done $450 million just in that month, which would put us on track to exceed 2017 easily. So this is not going anywhere. This is a real driver of value in businesses for all different types of coins. The second thing that we really see a huge amount of opportunity is this idea of a parallel financial system. So we talked before about how the banks become nervous with the idea of decentralized currencies. And so they're not going to provide you with banking services because they don't want to be involved. They don't want the liability. They don't want to be involved. So anything you can imagine that exists in the traditional financial services industry now is going to need a version in the crypto industry. And the bankers are not going to be the ones that provide it. Silicon Valley is not going to be the one that provide it. People like you in this room, the people who don't have a vested stake in the way the current industry works, are going to be the ones to build these things. This is not just throw crypto in front of everything, right? Because everybody loves that. It's like, oh, crypto this, crypto that. There is a very real need for every one of these things. And they are not being met in the marketplace right now, even with what we have already. So you can fill in that blank of crypto whatever, and it is still a green field of opportunity in terms to get there. And then we can talk about the disruption of the blockchain. People used to use the word disruption a lot, and it's sort of become a cliche. But the original idea of a disruption was when a technology came along, sometimes there was another industry or another technology that new technology literally made redundant. It wasn't necessary anymore, right? When the first money came along, it made bartering unnecessary. So when you actually come along and you say, here's a technology that makes another technology unnecessary or redundant, that is true disruption. And this is where you see the opportunity for the blockchain really coming up. Any business that operates on the premise of bringing together a bunch of people who are trying to make a transaction, providing a place for them to make that transaction, and then charging a fee when that transaction happens, is engaged in something called rent seeking. That model should sound very familiar to you because it is basically almost everything on the internet right now is the idea of bringing a bunch of people to the same place and facilitating transactions between them and capturing some of the value of those transactions, right? But if you have a blockchain, if you have a decentralization, there is no need for that centralized authority. They are not providing value to you by being there. They are only costing you money. And that blockchain, remember we said before, it's just a balance, right? It's just a number. You have 1, you have 2, you have 3, right? If instead of calling it money, instead of calling it JaxCoin, instead of calling it Bitcoin, we called it rides or miles, what did we just create? Uber, right? You're just tracking people who are spending rides and earning rides and then giving them a way to convert those rides into dollars. What if instead of rides we called it nights? Well, that's Airbnb. Right? There is no need for Airbnb if any one of you is perfectly capable of coordinating with any other person and renting out your space. There is no need to pay Airbnb that 30% fee because they are not providing any value in that transaction. You could also call them shares. And then what do we have? A stock market, a brokerage, just amongst ourselves of trading shares back and forth. Anything that you can just track and coordinate transactions between them can be exactly duplicated by a blockchain-based model. And this is why you see so much excitement about being able to truly disrupt these things, because if you no longer need that centralized authority, then there's no need to pay them the ridiculous fees that we pay them now. At the same time, these two also have two very, very powerful features to them. One is that they cannot be seized by a government. Technically, there is no way to seize them. Remember I said before that if you lose your Bitcoin, it's lost? The reason I said that is because if you don't have access to it, no one does, including the people that run the network, including the people that write the apps, including the governments in the country you live, do not have access to that. They cannot confiscate it. It is safe. It is also borderless. those apps that we were talking about that were letting us talk to JaxCoin amongst ourselves, right? If one of you flew to China with that app, the app wouldn't care, right? The app would just talk to all the other apps like normal. There's no such thing as a country border to a cryptocurrency. So if you were going to build a service that was global in nature, the moment you turn it on, it's global in nature. You don't need to go country by country like these people do. So the scale is instant the moment it comes out. So I wanted to use these as an example because I want everyone in here to be thinking about what they see as the opportunity, because really what's next out of this is what I want to stir that conversation in terms of what's the next thing that's going to be the application here that's going to be really compelling and that's going to drive this into the future that you can really wrap your hands around and make a difference in. So thank you.